So today we're looking at the archaeology of comparison. Now, I did enjoy last week, and I do look forward to Wednesday evenings because we look at rather interesting areas. Now, I want to look at a subject today that has illustrations, but there's a lot more thought and there's a lot more of a narrative behind what we're talking about today. Now, I want to explore ancient woodlands in the 4 localities that these comparison seminars are meant to cover. Now, I would like to start off by explaining what the word ancient means. If you look at one textbook, an ancient woodland or an ancient forest is a location that is around 400 years old at least. So to be ancient, it needs to be 400 years old and not been touched in that time. That causes me a little bit of a problem as an archaeologist, because ancient to me means more than 400 years ago. But when we're classifying trees and ancient woodland and forest, that goes back to 400 years ago. Now, if you want to examine woodlands and forests that haven't been touched by man, you've got to use the word primeval. Now, there are very few primeval woodlands and forests left anywhere in Britain. And I'll just throw away another fact that's sort of relevant. A survey took place a few years ago asking people how much of Britain they thought was built on. And people come up with the answer of 90%. Some people come up with the answer of 50%. And some people come up with the answer of 20%. Very few came up with the answer of around 5%. Only around 5% of the whole of Britain is built on. Interesting fact. Good in a quiz. What does that mean? Well, we do have a large amount of woodland and forest in Britain, but most of it has been planted. But there's one locality in Britain that I really love, and it's the island of Hoy. Hoy's a bit grubby and it's a bit ugly. It's not like the other islands in Orkney, but it's got something that really wanted me to go and see it. It's an ancient stroke primeval woodland. Now, there's a backstory associated with this locality. Now, the image in front of us, well, I'm not sure Pete saw this when he went to Orkney with me, but I know Bill's seen it. You saw it. Thank you. I think you saw it on the ferry, didn't you? But anyway, this is the Old Man of Hoy. And this is what the island of Hoy is known for, the Old Man. It's also a locality that was extensively fortified in the Second World War. It was going to be a last redoubt of British resistance to the Third Reich. But it's got something that we don't really find anywhere else. Something very, very old. And Bill knows what I feel for this location. And we'll talk about that in a moment. This. Bill knows this image very, very well. On the right, out of view, just out of view, on the right-hand side of the screen, can't really see it, is Berrydale Wood. And I walked along this path with Bill. a few years back on, I think it was our second trip to Orkney together. And Bill could see me getting very frustrated. I could not get to Berriedale Wood. I couldn't get there. And Bill and I agreed that next time we come to Orkney, we will go and have a look at Berriedale Wood. But the next time Bill came with me, he chickened out. I think the attraction of sitting alongside with Peter and Kathy inside a bothy, making a fire out of bradarack and seaweed was more attractive than seeing one of the most wonderful things that we've got in Britain, a true primeval locality. And that year, I actually got there. I went there with Michelle and my two stepchildren. And when we got there, I asked Michelle to marry me, the old romantic that I am. But with everything aside, being at that locality, it put hairs up on the back of my neck, and I didn't want to leave. Unfortunately, because of the ferry, we didn't have much time there. And it was, I think, one of those days that we had a camera, but I'm not sure I actually took a film, which is really unfortunate. And I've been threatened by Kathy, and Bill's given me a little bit of a threat that I cannot go back to Orkney without them. And I think Pete feels the same. If I ever do go back, the deal is they've got to go to Berriedale Wood. So this is the island of Hoy, Orkney. And before we actually go to Berriedale Wood, I've got to give Cumbria a bit of leveling. I don't have any images of any ancient woodlands in Cumbria. We've got a site in Cornwall called the Goliath Falls, which I'm sure Pete's aware of, with some really nice woodland there. And I know Cumbria, parts of it fairly well. And there are, believe me, ancient woodlands. But are they primeval? They're definitely attractive, and they're places that you can easily get lost. I believe the mark of a truly ancient woodland, not touched by our human ancestors, is a woodland that you can easily get lost in. But within that woodland, you find interesting things, not just trees. The mark of an ancient woodland in Wales, Cornwall, Cumbria, all across Britain, maybe with the exception of the island of Hoy, is boulders, glacial boulders. And with trees growing in amongst those glacial boulders, do you find something very, very old? Because if the landscape had seen trees felled for agriculture, those boulders would have also been moved. So hence, boulders and trees, Bill knows what I'm talking about, go together like ham and eggs. There's a place in the Vale of Glamorgan that is very close to Bridgend that has these large boulders. We've investigated it, but the trees don't look very old. But when you get the two together, it's a wonderful feeling, something that very few humans have ever been to. Aerial photography, it's great. When I first started giving lectures, just used to show images from a book and try and describe things. It's so great to be looking down on Berriedale Wood. Berriedale Wood is not a typical woodland. And why would it be when there are very few woodlands of this age? And there it is. There it is. And there it is. It's a sliver from a cleft between some rocks. It's got those types of trees that you might not associate with an ancient, primeval woodland. I can remember tromping through the pathways over here. I said to Bill, I want to go across here. And I think for once, Bill talked wisdom into me. Don't go any further, he said, Carl. You can come here again. And it would have been very treacherous going across this mire to this woodland. I think it would have been worth it, but not if I'd been rescued by Air Sea Rescue. As we move on, there it is, Berriedale Wood. So what we need to do, we need to tell you a little bit more about this wonderful Berriedale. So I've got an article in front of me, and it tells me one or two things that will be very helpful to all of us. But before we do that article, let's mention this. Berriedale Wood, it is considered to be the northmost natural woodland in the British Isles. Natural, not ancient, not primeval, that word natural that takes us all the way back. It's part of an RSPB reserve, and there is not actually a footpath to it. So Michelle and I had to trudge across this landscape. But it was that time of year where we weren't damaging anything under our feet because it was so overgrown that we struggled to find our way back. It took us an hour from the road to get to Berriedale Wood. That's how untouched this wonderful landscape is. The island does see devastating fires, continuing to be a risk factor in regards to this woodland. This woodland, to us, has probably not been set alight for a long time. And if it has been, it's naturally recovered. There's been estimates of Berriedale actually being a throwback from the period of the Ice Age. Just as the ice is melting, Berriedale was formed with those types of trees that would have been the first wave of trees to have colonized this type of landscape. The big trees don't come in first. You don't see oaks and elm going in first. You see the list of trees that we find at Berriedale, such as the downy birch and the aspen and the hazel and the rowan and the willow. Those are pioneer trees. Could be said that the Scots pine is a pioneer tree as well. However, that's not in with the assemblage. What we do see dominating the landscape is some natural varieties of heather, roses, honeysuckle, ferns, and a blueberry as well. So as we think about Berriedale, we get a wonderful idea of what's up there. And yes, if we ever do go to Orkney and we need a little bit of money to pay for the, I was going to say the train fare, the plane fare, you guys can come with us. So actually, that image, the one you're looking at there, is not Berriedale. That's Goliath Falls in Cornwall. Can you see the comparison? Berriedale has to make do with what it's got. It's fairly isolated, low-lying trees in a shallow cleft. So it wouldn't be really able to support those great trees of the south. But look at this. This is Goliath Falls in Cornwall as a comparison to see where you can get great trees and the rowans and the hazels that you might see and you will see at Berriedale Wood. That's the comparison. Water is always the life bringer for these localities. Naturally, Berriedale Wood and the cleft in the rock produces some very fine and fresh water, very similar to Goliath Falls that you find in Cornwall. There it is, looking out of Berriedale. It's very bit of a faded picture, actually. One thing about Berriedale is that they do believe that the trees are advancing into the moorland in front, and that's a good sign. The trees retreated into this cleft, and that's all that was left of them. But the trees are now starting to populate the valley, and maybe one day, as the valley is left to its own devices, can't be used for agriculture. Very few people live on Hoy, and very few people live in this locality. There are no sheep and goats grazing within this landscape either, and they wouldn't. The marshland wouldn't be good for their cloven feet. So what we do see is that this is a truly natural habitat, that the trees are going to reclaim their own back one day. And look at that. Doesn't that look absolutely fabulous? Going into the cleft in the rock, looking down into Berriedale. I did think once that maybe you could have got from Hoy, the old man of Hoy, and gone over the mountain to this locality. But the undergrowth is very, very thick, and we wouldn't have been able to do it. And even if we had, we wouldn't have been able to get down into these woods anyway, because it's that cleft, the rocky landscape, that protects the trees from humans and any other life from destroying it. And also the inaccessibility and the topography of the landscape stops this landscape being set ablaze by those wildfires that we see everywhere else. Doesn't that look really good? It's quite miniature. It's nice and tender with those mosses and those lichens. Let's tell you a little bit more. So when I do research like this, it's always sort of good to go with different sources. And again, repeating, Hoy is home to the most northerly native woodland in Britain. And there's one interesting thing that should be said at this point, this juncture. What should actually be said is that I was always told that there weren't any trees in Orkney, but there are. And then I was told that there are no trees growing on Shetland. And believe me, there are trees growing on Shetland. They are out and about. But to have a really, truly old woodland, you go to the island of Hoy. Considering the generally treeless landscape that Orkney is now famous for, this is something we're very proud of, Berriedale. The woodland can be found off the post road, sheltered in between the hills of Hoy, and surrounded by vast expanses of open moorland. This was very nearly its downfall because of the various wildfires. We'll just read out this as well. This is from the website that deals with looking after Berriedale. There have been 2 major accidental wildfires on the reserve since we purchased it in 1983. In 2010, a wildfire of such intensity started in Rackwick that at times all our warden and the firefighters could do was watch as the flames ragged closer and closer to Berriedale, that very ancient landscape. The woodland has a special hold on many Hoy hearts, and firefighting teams from the island and mainland worked tirelessly with local volunteers for 2 days to prevent the fire from reaching it. Although the flames came within meters of the woodland, that has grown on this spot for the last, wait for it, 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Thankfully, it was left unharmed. And actually, you know what I should do? I should maybe show you these images that I'm actually looking at. So let's sort of let's see if I can screen share this. There, that'll be lovely. Lovely jubbly. And hopefully this is coming up. You can sort of, Berriedale is, let's put Berriedale's by there, and you can see the flames coming towards it, quite ferocious flames. And being in the South Wales valleys, we do have these fires, and they just go on. There's nothing stopping them. And this was in 2010, actually. And there you go. It's the other thing as well is they were threatened as well in 2019. Look at that. So you can imagine firefighters visible in the smoke on the lower right of this image shows the frightening scale. I can't see them as the wildfire approaches Berriedale, but they were able to save it. So, this is looking at that image. That is Berriedale itself in February 2019. Nothing's changed since we went there. And just read this. We also took some time to walk up and enjoy Berriedale itself. It's a gorgeous woodland with a unique atmosphere and heritage appreciated by Orcadians and visitors alike. There is nothing else like it in Orkney, and it was wonderful to be able to do our bit to look after this precious place. It would have been an absolute disaster for Berriedale to have gone up in smoke. But it's lasted there for a very, very long time. And I'm sure it would have survived any fires that come close to it, licking the heather around, as it were. So let's go back to those wonderful images, looking into Berriedale. And here we go. Let's have the archaeological content today. So this is not just about trees. The one thing to understand is that these woodlands have been left for a reason. And I used to call it the mind problem of those dark woods, those woods that you must not go in. There's always been a fear of the dark woodlands. There's always been a fear of the wild wood. And if you read or listen to any of the works of Magnus Magnusson, in the folklore of Scandinavia, Iceland, it talks about those dark, untamed woodlands that you could keep out of. J.R.R. Tolkien writes about these wild woods within the books Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And it really comes into the history and archaeology and our nature to avoid these woodlands. And why the fear? It's the same fear that we have when we think of water. For example, water itself once didn't disconnect us from mainland Europe. Water itself, there were trickles of water and we were joined to Europe. And 8,000 years ago, there was that great flood and we were disconnected from Europe. So there's always been a fear in the British mindset of water. And, Pete will tell you and Pete will tell you and Goff will tell you that there's reasons why sailors don't like to be able to swim. That sense of superstition. But anyway, back to these woods. When humans started to first tame the British landscape, those woodlands were to be feared. It was in the open areas that man would live. And it would be in those open areas that women and men would work to cut down the trees and work on the agriculture, the animal husbandry, building homes, but not in the woods. Woods back then, all the way back to human history in Britain, had wolves, bears, wild cats, and other beasties that we're not really sure existed or not. but woods were to be avoided. So that's why in many cases these woods have been left. But then eventually, as the wolves were culled and the bears sent off to circuses and culled themselves, the woods become more tamed. But Berriedale isn't. One sign of ancient woodlands is not just the trees, is the fauna that actually live in them. Fauna that hasn't been culled by man, like the pine marten and the red squirrel. And we actually start to see the introduction of wild cats back in Britain as well. Looking again at Berriedale Wood, what I'd like to do is share something else. Now, many, many years ago, when my grandmother was alive, she said, "What do you want for Christmas?" But she bought me a book. I probably said something else. And one thing that should be said is this paragraph here: Woods and Human Affairs. After the last ice age, the British Isles was almost entirely covered by trees. So the ice melted 12,000 years ago. And by 10,000 years before, major human populations could actually get to Britain and populate. When I say major human populations, we're still only talking about a few thousand people here. And before they could get here, within that 2,000 years, between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, you could basically, if you were a squirrel, you could go across the canopy all the way from Orkney all the way through to Cornwall. And you wouldn't have to put your feet on the ground. Well, the squirrel wouldn't anyway. So this was classed as the wild wood. But unfortunately, around 6,000 years ago, with the disconnection of Britain from Europe, the wild wood started to be removed. That untamed fear was slowly disappearing. That land was needed by farmers. And sometimes the best way to get rid of woodland is to set light to it. This was ancient woodland. It's easier to set light to an ancient woodland when there's a lot of timber, there's a lot of wood on the ground, ready to be set alight. It is therefore likely that by the late Roman period into the AD 400s, farmland and moorland, both man-made habitats and sometimes natural, dominated the English landscape and the islands such as Orkney and the landscape of Cornwall as well. And most of those upland areas have been removed and bereft of trees. Quite large areas of woodland, however, still remained. You don't get Robin of Sherwood for nothing. You don't get Jack of Kent wandering around the woodlands in the medieval period for no reason at all. But slowly but surely, those great woodlands and forests became cleared. But there was one thing that started to happen: the management of woodland, the planting of trees, creating a new landscape. This is why we say and we state that woodland over 400 years old is ancient, but it's mainly been planted. It's mainly artificial. There's a whole lecture looking at ancient woodland and trying to interpret it. But I just want to mention just a couple of things as well. Not only looking at large varieties of ground-loving anemones, bluebells, foxgloves, and so on. There are 4 layers to a truly ancient, primeval woodland, or an ancient woodland that's not been interfered with for 1,000 years. So, primeval, look for the boulders. And then on the ground, you get a variety of mosses. Species like elfcup and common funguses. That's called the ground layer. But you've got to have the boulders. If you've got the boulders, that's primeval. If you don't have the glacial boulders, ancient. The ground layer. The field layer would be those ferns, the beautiful wood sorrel, the wood anemone, sweet violet, and green hellebore, amongst hundreds of other species. That's your field layer. And if you've got a great variety in your field layer, it's truly old. It's the wild wood. And then you get a third layer, the shrub layer. Hazel, bramble, ivy and holly. And let's chuck in that rowan. That makes our really true ancient habitat at Berriedale. And then you get the big tree canopy layer above, which is actually absent at Berriedale, but I've actually explained why. But then you get those really ancient trees, the beech and the ash. The earth and the erosion is not enough to have great root systems at Berriedale. Hence why you don't get these massively great old trees there. But nevertheless, Berriedale is our most primeval example in the whole of Britain. So that's known as the 4-tier woodland layer system. So what it would be good to do is actually look at a few more images at Berriedale and maybe discuss a couple of old woodlands across our own land in Cumbria as well, because that's what we're meant to be doing, a bit of comparison. And again, these trees coming out that cleft, populating this wonderful moorland in front. And you just think that, you know, where you've got a barren landscape like Hoy, you've got these little gems. And Hoy, and there are lots of other places like it, that if you really look, you can find some really old gems. I'm going to say it. I've always thought, if you want to compare Cornwall, I always used to think as Cornwall as a bleak, barren landscape. I didn't used to think there was any trees there. Until you start visiting Cornwall. It's quite a beautiful landscape, actually. It's got all those clefts and crevices with trees and unexplored areas, just like Goliath Falls in Cornwall. And Cornwall has its beautiful places, like anywhere else. And I'm glad I've been there, and I'm glad I've experienced that landscape. It's not just empty, barren moorland that I once thought it was. There's a lot more to Cornwall, like there's a lot more to Orkney, like there's a lot more to upland areas of Cymru and Cumbria as well. It's by experience. And this tree, I've touched this tree. I know this tree. So you've got these downy birches there, and you've got these silver birches as well. And it's, you know, next time I go there, I'm going to do a wonderful film. And do you know what? It reminds me, hopefully I'm going to write down, and I'm going to see if I do have a film of Berriedale Wood in my archive. And if so, I'm going to stick it online, and maybe I could share the experience of actually being in Berriedale Wood. And again, trees starting to colonize the landscape. Let's have a drink. Isn't that great? Rosamond, are you still with me?
I'm still here. It's taking me on a sort of a journey through the woodland. They're lovely pictures.
They are, and it's just those trees are so alive, and you go to them and they make you feel alive, and you start to think, well, I know human beings have really devastated the British landscape. They've really devastated it. But you almost see Mother Nature saying, hang on a minute, I know you've totally screwed with the clock here. But if you just give me a little bit of time, I can take it back. And this is what I sense. And this is a very new image. And I this is not what Michelle and I saw when we went there, and the rest of the gang in 2016. This is so wonderful. And it would be so devastating if fire had taken us away. And the other thing as well is that what you do find in these landscapes, like you do see in Cornwall, you go across landscapes like Cornwall, and you see clefts and crevices around, and you think, well, there's nothing much to this landscape, and then you start to see little trees, little aspens and willows and hazels, and Mother Nature has got a little bit. She's claimed a little bit of the landscape that has been so stripped. For example, when you compare it with Cornwall in regards to tin mining, well, Hoy itself is very rich in iron, so this landscape has been very much torn apart like Cornwall. But these landscapes can recover, but sometimes they need a little bit of human help. But Berriedale hasn't needed human help. So we've got this image in the background, and this is an image. We've moved from Berriedale now, actually. This is an image known as the Cambrian Wood in West Wales. And a few years ago, I wanted to ascertain where these boulders were. I was wanting to find boulder woodlands, because that place I was talking about outside Bridgend, south of Bridgend, is actually called Boulder Wood, and it's got boulders there. And I sent out a survey. It was printed in the newspapers, and I asked people, can you write back to me with examples of boulders in fields? And I've been with Bill to the Stormy Down landscape. And when I went with Bill to the Stormy Down landscape, again, also just outside Bridgend, when we went there, I think Bill can remember me getting very excited with finding boulders within a field. And I got excited because I thought, hang on a minute, why haven't these boulders been removed? Why are they still here? It's almost as if whoever had removed the trees didn't continue the process of clearance. And we start to think, well, maybe there are one or two trees out there that haven't seemed to be removed. I go out across landscapes, and I've been, for example, with Michelle up into the Rhondda Valley, and I've been with another chap called Martin, and we explore. And when we go to these landscapes, it's very rare that we ever come across any trees. But when we do come across trees, they usually look really old, and they look like trees that somebody has said, actually, we're going to leave that tree there. So even though we might not have large tracts of ancient woodland and forests, we do get occasionally those very old trees. And sometimes those very old trees are the remnants of landscapes that were mainly cleared, but that tree and its roots go way back, and it can remember the time when it was once part of the core of a primeval landscape. I think it was Pete again. We went to a field outside Dyffryn, and there was a tree in the middle of a field, and It was a very strange tree. It was I think it was a fat, squat tree in the middle of a field, and there was nothing else around it. And I can remember I said, well, this is an old tree, but there's one interesting thing about this tree. This tree has grown alone for a very, very long time because there's been no competition around it. But let me give you a little bit of a clue. If you're looking for a very ancient woodland, find a really tall, slender tree that is also really fat, but isn't squat. And it's likely that that tall, tender tree saw the removal of its friends over the past 200 years. And maybe that once stood as part of a core of a landscape that could truly be called primeval once. I'm going to read a little bit of an article, and I want to go to Cwm George in Dinas Powys. Don't have any images there, but again, I think Rosamond and Pete will know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But we won't do that yet, shall we? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this little article out. It's lots of people. It's strange that interests in various areas of our heritage seem to go in waves, and from time to time there's an explosion of people being interested in trees. So this little article: Wales has thousands more hectares of ancient woodland than previously thought after new technology was used to trace them. So that is very interesting, because by tracing that ancient woodland can tell us two things. If that ancient woodland is primeval, it could indicate areas where humans have never been. Or if they have been there, they haven't built settlements and they haven't mined. When you actually start to see woodland with lots of the trees the same, but it's classed as ancient, you can get an idea of how the landscape's been managed by our human ancestors. So now there's an inventory of ancient trees, native trees dating back at least 400 years. And this inventory has been slowly building since the 1980s. And now we've got trees across Wales, 62,000 hectares of ancient woodland across Wales. Again, 62,000 hectares. However, that was before they used the new technology. And the new technology has not doubled the number of hectares, but we actually have 95,000 hectares of trees. 95,000 hectares. That's a lot. 95,000 hectares. That is incredible. The number of ancient woodland, ancient trees that we have across the whole of our land. I've often wondered that not all of those trees have been examined. We might have trees out there that could be 1,500 years old. We have trees, yew trees, still living in Wales that are in excess of 2,000 years old in one or two church graveyards. I think the figure is somewhere around 50 yew trees across Wales that are over 1,000 years old and counting. So these ancient woodlands contain those oaks, those ashes, and those birches, but also lots of the other species that make a woodland truly ancient. Why am I using the word woodland? Woodland refers to deciduous trees, trees that don't hold their leaves all year round. Forests, conifers. It's more that the problem is looking for conifers, forests across Wales, and trying to find ancient trees is very awkward, because the truly ancient conifer is in fact the Scots pine, and Scots pines are actually quite rare, and most of them, because they grow very straight, have been felled across our landscape. But there might be a few out there to be recorded and viewed. So naturally, you know, when anyone talks about, you know, we haven't got many old trees across Wales, like I sometimes do. We've got 95,000 hectares of ancient woodland. Some of that might be primeval. Now, Cwm George and Case Hill woodland near Dinas Powys. It's been found out that some of the woodland around Dinas Powys is actually fairly old. And by looking even at maps, Ordnance Survey maps, some of these trees in Dinas Powys have been found recorded on old maps dating back to 1880, marked as old wood. Just by looking at maps, we know that some of the woodland around Dinas Powys is very old. And this is one of the things. When you go to the wonderful defended Iron Age, Roman, and early medieval site at Dinas Powys, which is known as Dinas Powys Hill Fort, you look out across a landscape and you see me pointing out ancient woodland and some really truly old trees. And I've got to be honest with you, am I right in saying that, Rosamond? What do you think?
Yes, I feel that it is ancient woodland, and it extends beyond there, doesn't it, as well?
It extends
I'm
all
not
the
sure
way
of the name.
towards the north. Yes, it does. So there's stuff
Yes.
towards the west. Obviously, over towards the east, you come. No, it extends over towards the east. So going over towards the west, you've got the village and so on. But it does extend quite extensively, and it's only now that they're actually starting to work out that the woodland around Dinas Powys is truly ancient. And I have a tendency to feel that there's one or two very small pockets of woodland, for example, around the likes of Llantwit Major. So it's just, you start to get into this and you start to wonder, you start to question. In fact, by finding ancient woodland, it helps you question some of the old statements that we've, you know, cut down all the trees, and you know there were bits left. The wild wood was left, as I've said earlier on. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like to go to Goliath Falls. So that's another one from the Cambrian woodland. You know, you can see boulders and mosses and trees, and this is the Goliath Falls. Now, there's one thing about these types of landscapes, because there's rivers flowing through them, and sometimes they're very inaccessible. The trees haven't been cut down, and naturally you get the likes of the aspen, you get the likes of various types of willow, the goat and the crack willow, and maybe the weeping willow or something like that. And you get sort of others growing on a slope like the rowan. And it's these types of landscapes, you find them across Cornwall. And probably I'd like a little bit of a response at the end from Pete, actually, probably agreeing with me in that you can go across Cornwall and it's just basically an empty barren moorland. You can just go around the corner and there's a little cleft and there's like a beautiful landscape with flowing water, and there's trees and there's ferns and there's really old trees, but you do actually find that in lots of parts of Cumbria, and you actually find that in lots of parts of Cymru as well. It's not the type of experience that you get in other parts of England. Actually, it's specific to those three areas, that type of experience. So there's the Goliath Falls in Cornwall. And Pete, thumbs up if you've actually been there. Pete, why is it over the past few weeks I've been visiting lots of places you've never been to? But that's why you do these. So Goliath Falls, it describes, here's a little bit of a description about Goliath Falls. The river here, having emerged from the moors, enters Drainer's Wood, and here carves a rocky gorge, where the river tumbles in a fine cascade known as the Goliath Falls. Pronounced the Galitha, is derived from the Cornish word for obstruction. The Goliath Falls are also by the site of the old Victoria copper mine. But even with its locality, lots of the trees have remained untouched. And naturally, it's not really the type of place you're going to cut down a tree when you've got boulders and water everywhere. And that's basically the point of this. So let's look at a few more images before we finish. And you're looking at that and you're thinking it's got everything. It's got mosses, it's got water, it's got boulders, it's got gnarly trees, it's got some old trees in there. And you think, no wonder it's been left alone. And again, like Berridale, like some of those weird, obscure places. And I will say like Dinas Powys, because Dinas Powys has got some weird little clefty like valleys that are, you know, really muddy and boggy and not really good for anything, but trees grow there. So that's how you find these types of landscapes. And it's not just by, you know, looking at aerial photography, it's by using all that science out there to really help us understand what's going on. And you never know, we might actually find it occasionally does happen that people examine really old places like this and they actually occasionally come across new species of flora and fauna. It's very rare, but it's in these types of landscapes that you're going to find things, because humans haven't mucked around with it, find things that have never been identified before. I'm not saying we're going to find a new variety of woodpecker or owl, but we might find a flying mammal like a bat that's not been recognized, and we don't have many bat species in Britain. And this is actually the last image. And again, what I've been trying to say to everybody is, when you get to something gnarly and old like this, it gives a sense of something very, very special. And I would like to mention something else as well. Within these types of places, you do actually find, like the point I'm making, there's in the Rhondda Valleys, there's a place called Taran Dysant. And at Taran Dysant, there's some weird rock carvings, and it's set within a weird little landscape like this. And this is what this reminds me of. So in those, in a way, actually, in places that humans don't cut down trees or don't interfere with, you might occasionally find little oddments, like little carvings on rocks and maybe a little standing stone erected. Not that people have ever lived there or settled there, but those things might be an indicator of a conjunction between Mother Nature and the human world, but without humans tearing down all the trees and destroying it conclusively. And when you don't destroy things conclusively, you truly have something special. These primeval ancient woodlands that have survived the wrath of humanity down the ages for over 10,000 years. And I think we're going to learn a lot more over the next few years about these types of localities. Just one last thing. A few years ago, it was, I think it was a good 5 years ago now. We had this girl from Swansea University who the university, paid us to work with us, and she went to Wentwood Forest. And the one thing about her survey to Wentwood Forest is that Wentwood Forest, like lots of other places, was a landscape that had been cleared at one stage. And that in amongst Wentwood Forest, we were using LiDAR technology to find various earthworks, burnt mounds, and sort of raised platforms for buildings and so on. And it was a very, very interesting survey. But I can remember when everyone was really disappointed because it was not, they didn't feel that it was an ancient woodland, and it wasn't, because those trees were actually growing through man-made sites. So it was an artificial woodland, is Wentwood. But I'm sure, as I've described, there's lots of older trees there still to be found that survived the clearance of that landscape by human beings in the close and distant past. So that's the comparison of these ancient woodlands today. And what I would like to do is find out if there's any questions, and let's just try and keep all the questions and all the responses really relevant. And actually, I would like to hear from all of you a woodland that you may have visited that you've either felt was primeval or truly ancient. Next week, I'd like to mention that next week we're going to be doing strange things in archaeology and sort of strange monuments. I haven't exactly worked out what we're going to be looking at, but there's going to be a sense of comparison by a weird doorway. And then we got the last one after that, the following week. But we'll talk about the next course and all the rest of it next week. So what we're going to do, we're going to stop sharing, and we're going to start with Peter. I mentioned you a bit, so Peter, now it's your time to respond.
You certainly did. By the way, Bill didn't come with us to the Old Man of Hoy.
I did.
Because he went somewhere else on that day. It was just me and Kathy went to the Boffey and lit a fire.
No, Bill went to the Old Man of Hoy with me the previous year. That's why he didn't go that year.
When I was there, he didn't. Yeah.
That's because he wanted.
I went to the Highland Park Distillery, followed by an invitation to dinner. I'd been on cruise the year before.
That's it, yeah.
So whiskey and dinner became before archaeology that day.
Shame on you. Right, Pete.
Looking at woodlands the way you have, I pass through woodlands and love walking in woodlands. But I've never looked at it in the same sort of way that you have mentioned here today. And I think I will always look at them in a different way now when I go into a woodland, and whether it's an old woodland or whether it's a new woodland or whatever. But Hensall Forest is quite an old woodland. Part of it has been planted, but there is part of it also which is very, very old. And that was always intriguing. Used to go there many times and walk through the woods. And of course, as you say, the one going up to Dinas Powys Hill Fort, that again was an intriguing old woodland, as you say, but never thought of it as being an ancient woodland.
And I really appreciate that observation, and I really appreciate Hensall, because I've been to Hensall many times, and I've not understood it, but that was a few years ago. When you start to understand things, and actually, Pete, I will be going to Hensall with the same eyes that you've been discussing as well. So it's not always black and white. When you look at plantations, sometimes the forestry has left some of these ancient trees, and I think that needs to be examined a little bit more. Yes. Rosamond.
Yes, I loved all the pictures tonight. It really made you sort of think of being in the woodlands and takes you away from all this the COVID lark, thinking, well, the woodlands will hopefully outlive any viruses, etc., that we're fighting at the moment. They'll continue on. But I was thinking of Leckwith Woods as well. Because Dinas Powys Woods, Leckwith, and then beyond then there's Peterson's, Super Ely. They must have all been one big woodland.
It all was one big woodland, like Hensel. It's been partly planted at Leckwith, but there are definitely going to be old trees up there, and you know that when you look at the St. Fagans landscape, because you see occasional trees dotted across the landscape, and those trees would be part of that great woodland that we're talking about now. Yeah. Bill.
Yeah. Apart from being the most ancient woodland being Berry's dead, it has the advantage, of course, that it is so extremely remote, difficult to get to. So very few people go there, so it retains its pristine condition. Now, you can't say that to other ancient woodlands because that attracts more visitors because it's easier to get into, and they can cause damage, like having picnics and lighting fires, etc. And that does happen. So I know in Wales, it's Natural Resources Wales are the guardians of ancient woodlands, presumably. Yeah. And my own local ancient woodland.
Go on.
Yeah, they're forests, not woodland.
Yeah. Thank you.
My local ancient woodland, you mentioned the one in Bridgend, the Boulder woodland. Now, I don't know which one you were talking about, but my local one, well, almost local, is in Blackmill, which is at the start of the Ogmore Valley. And there's a section of ancient oakwood on the side of the valley as you go in. Now, I've been in that, and that is quite an impressive. It's on quite a slope, actually, but it's quite extensive. So that's the only protected one I know locally, apart from yours. So is that the one you're referring to, or is there another one?
No, it's another one. It's just it's south of Bridgend, actually. I'd need to show you on a map, but it's known as Boulder Wood.
I'm on archaeology Cambrian.
Thanks.
So what? Okay. So and thanks for the correction, Bill. I always lecture people on being woods are deciduous, and
yes, yeah.
Conifers, yeah. I always lecture people. It's good to have somebody biting back for once.
And forests are non-fertile because they poison the ground with their pine droppings, of course.
That is dead right. That's another explanation. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Pat,
they used to collect the pine needles from where they replanted in Hensel for ericaceous peat to grow to various other plants.
Nice.
Slightly acid, ericaceous.
Nice. I like that. What about you, Goff?
Yeah, it was great. But I was thinking about talking about forests and woodlands. I was thinking of the prehistoric trees you see exposed at low tides on the Welsh coast.
Now that itself, that's an interesting thing. It'd be good to see a map with those trees linking all those areas that we do think are primeval, and that would be an interesting map to see. Yeah, you are very right, because lots of the like Borth, and you've got Maris in West Wales. Lots of those landscapes, those trees were growing about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. It was only because of water levels rising that the saline conditions destroyed their root system and poisoned them. But yeah, you're good to mention that, and that is part of the extension of the Great Woodland, and we forget that. We do forget that, and that's a good point. Very good point. Pat.
Yes. Well, I must say, wait, I'm looking for this. Oh, I must say, it's totally fascinating and wonderful. My daddy was a U.S. forester, and his first job out of college was, on a tower looking for fires in Wyoming. And then when I was growing up, he was stationed in Columbus, Ohio,
Yes.
and did the forests there. But when he was younger, he did a chain thing. Remember this thing where you measure wood by dragging a chain,
Yes.
certain length, and then you measure it again, and then you can decide what kind of trees are there. And, and he also worked for a paper bag company down in Georgia as well. Well, anyhow, while you were talking, I had my phone here doing a little research, and they gave the percentage of woodland in each of the countries of Great Britain.
Go for it.
Any idea what the percentage is in Wales?
Yeah, no,
England?
come on. That's what we want. Come on, let's have it.
Okay, first of all, we'll start up. Scotland is 19%.
19%. Excellent. Go for it.
Right.
Let's have England.
England, 10%.
All right, then. Fair enough.
This is areas of woodland, and 9% in Northern Ireland.
Right. Okay.
So what do you think Wales is?
Now, I'm going to, now knowing what I know, we're saying 95%, but I also know there's a lot of moorland. We've got Brecon, we've got, but there's a lot of trees in West Wales. There's a lot in South Wales. Do you know what? I'm gonna go with this being a trick question. I'm gonna go with this being about 10.
15.
Oh, do you know what?
Scotland has more than we do. They have more than we do. I couldn't believe that.
But they have more people wandering around in kilts. So
and
go on.
Also can buy wood. If you want to, you can actually purchase your own woodland. It may only be an acre or something, but you can actually purchase it.
Yeah,
and
well,
you can't stay on it more than 28 days a year, but you can, it's your woodland. So you can go and purchase woodland.
Well, Goff is making Goff is going making a donation to Archaeology Cymru, and we can all have our classes there 28 days of the year. That's great.
And Carl, Barry is 100%.
The only problem is the starting thing for buying some woodland is usually about 10 grand. So
well, okay, that's a bit too much for Goff.
They sold a section of the woodland over to this alongside the Port Road.
Oh yeah,
that was sold not so long ago.
It's probably a load of jippos have bought it. Right, and finally, talking about jippos, let's have one last. Oh, we got Pam with us still. Pam, let's have something from you quick, because we all got to go to bed, and then we'll have Claire.
It's not going to be that quick, but I'll keep it accurate.
No, try. Yeah. Don't be long.
Right, Batterbow Forest, where we go for a walk. I feel there's an encampment because it's circular. Parts of a ditch is round the outside of it because some of it has been taken. Off to the left, quarter of a kilometre perhaps, there's the burial mound. And you saying that there's boulders in a forest and most of it is deciduous, that confirms that it is ancient.
Obviously, boulders, old trees. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but naturally,
that is that.
It doesn't just because you've got human occupation stuff in there. It might mean that some areas were just left alone, and that's the point I've been making. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely something there because it's fascinating.
Come on, let's get photographs. Come on, I want photographs next week. All right.
Right. Okay. I will do that.
Good. Right. Good. And then finally, thank you for that. I like a bit of odd stuff like that from Pam. She always does the odd stuff. And finally, Claire, let's have something quick before I say goodnight to everyone.
It reminded me of one of the walks I went on in Cornwall.
Not with us.
It took about 3 hours to get there. We were walking over massive boulders, like you said.
Ah.
And before we got to the beach, which was all very huge boulders, just nothing but massive boulders.
Yeah.
There was a little forest.
Nice.
And it sounded very similar to what you've been describing. So I'm going to research about it because it was nothing like I've never seen before.
Now, again, we want photographs, all of us. That's what we need for next week. Go for it. Good. That's what we need.
I will.
Right, now what I'm going to say, that's really good one. I want to do some odd stuff next week. I want to do some really odd stuff. So if I'm not going to describe what that is, but I've just got to work out whether I am going to look at Brock's next week and then compare them, sort of have a little bit of Fogo thing and something up in Cumbria. I just want to do some weird stuff next week. I haven't really thought it all out. But if that's everything from everybody today, that's absolutely been... Go on quick, Pete.
One thing about boulders.
Yeah.
Over on Flatholm, the Feldspar Ridge granite boulder, the pink boulder, where it's several tons in weight, and the only place where that exists naturally is Anglesey. So that has to be brought by glacier action, I would believe.
And yeah, exactly. And it's a weird that it's still there. It's very strange. It's still there. So, and again, if anyone's got anything they want to add next week about boulders and stuff that they've seen, that's always useful. Send images through to me, but let me know where they are. If nobody's got anything else to say, that's been a really good one again tonight. Another really great one on a Wednesday evening. Tomorrow's lectures, the lecture in the morning and the afternoon will be slightly different than I usually do. You will soon see, and we'll obviously do tomorrow evening. I got 2 ghost walks on the weekend. That's going to be fun. No break for the wicked, and other than that, I've got 1-to-1 with Rosamond next week and so on. I got to thank you for doing this today, and it's been absolutely wonderful. Thanks for your support. And if there's nothing else anyone's like to say, I'm going to say goodnight to Pete.
Good night.
Rosamond, Bill, Sam.
Good night, everybody.
Folks.
Good night.
Good night, all. Thanks very much, Carl. Good night, everyone.
My
Nice to see
pleasure.
you, Rosalind.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
No night. Take care, Pam. Thank you to whoever's listened to this today. And if anyone would like to add anything else to the content, which is on YouTube, then please do. And I would like, as usual, to invite anyone who's actually watching this to subscribe and like. And what I'm going to do is put a couple of things after this now. And anyone can join my classes available at www.archaeologycymruonline.weebly.com, and join me live next April the 10th, Saturday, for my live evening, controversial areas in archaeology. You can book online, www.KARL-JAMES.com. So that's all from me. Thank you very much. And thanks for everybody's support. Thank you.